More than a regent or a mutant or a queen, she is a god. Storm, you're up. Oh, I'm so excited. We're finally doing the Storm episode, y'all. Can you believe it? It's taken, 7 years to get to this point? I'm excited. I'm super excited. But we have to do the intro first. Welcome to Super Black. I am your host, Carl Waldron. Thank you so much for listening. Make sure to hit that bell on YouTube and subscribe to this podcast on your favorite podcasting app, or just subscribe on YouTube. Tell a friend, tell many friends, tell your mama, tell your grandmama. We're talking about black superheroes and pop culture and all types of positive representation. Today, the Weather Queen is up on deck. She's at bat. She's got the bat in her hand. It's time to talk about Storm. Woo! Let's do this. Oh my God. I just want to say that there's a reason why it's taken me 7 years to do this episode. And I'll tell you, I think I've said it in multiple episodes before, but Storm terrifies me. She's so huge. She's big. You know, I started this episode maybe, no lie, 10 times. Over the years, just 10 different episodes. I've deleted every single one because I couldn't do Storm justice, you know? I think there are maybe 3 characters that I've done that with. There's Storm, there's Icon, which we still haven't done an episode about, and then there was Jon Stewart. Those are the 3 that I was like, I don't know how to do this episode. But I really, 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 really wanted to do Storm, and I really, really, really wanted to do her justice, but I realized I was putting a lot of pressure on myself for a fictional character. So I said, you know what? Screw it. We're doing it live. We're going to do Storm today. We had some time, the family's occupied, and I'm motivated. So here we are talking about the weather goddess, the queen of the X-Men, Ororo Munroe, a.k.a. Storm. Now, I didn't know where to start this episode. I was, running through all of Storm's accolades, and there are many. And I figured I'd start it out right on Marvel.com. Marvel has a fantastic breakdown of Ororo Munroe, the psionic manipulator of weather. And I wanted to just give you the base stats that Marvel has depicted for Storm. And then I'll go into why I feel they're kind of weird and why Marvel's kind of scale of powers is I just don't get it. So Marvel has this 6 level sort of graph of how, they rate powers. It's durability, energy, fighting skills, intelligence, speed, and strength. Now, these, I don't know where these come from, but I know that they were the basis for a lot of the stats on the Marvel cards, the old Marvel cards that I grew up collecting. So they kind of helped gauge how powerful a character was based on like the kind of like extreme cases, like the Watcher, who's I believe all his stats were just off the charts, and someone like Galactus, who's you would think all his things were off the charts, but some of them were a little shorter than you would think. And then lower tier mutants who had like 1s and 2s. I don't remember any of those. But here are Storm's power levels. So her durability is 2. Her energy is 5. Her fighting skills are 4. Intelligence is 2. Speed is 3. And her strength is 2. Now, I'll go over that one more time. Durability, 2. Energy, 5. Fighting skills, 4. Intelligence, 2. Speed, 3. And strength, 2. Storm is an Omega level mutant. What does that mean? Omega level mutants in the Marvel X-Men universe are the top spot. They're the kings and queens. They're the strongest mutants in the world. It's like Magneto, what's that kid? Reed Richards' son. I forget his name. Iceman. they're basically mutants who can, conjure up an immense amount of power. Like Iceman is an Omega level mutant because he can manipulate the moisture in the air. So he has basically unlimited powers. As long as the air is moist, he can do something, right? He can turn himself into a giant ice golem. He can freeze an entire continent if he wanted to just by manipulating the air particles. Storm is on that level or even higher, where she's capable of immense amount of power manipulation. She can control the weather through some psionic abilities. I'm not going to say they never explain it. I'm sure they do. I have not read every Storm comic or iteration of Storm. That would be crazy for me, who has the time. But I know that her powers are quote unquote mutant based, but also she's a descendant of goddesses and priestesses and sorceresses and whatnot. So she has some inane magical abilities. So that allows her to control and manipulate the weather of not only our planet, but any planet she visits, like Mars. Or she can be in space and manipulate whatever little atmosphere there may be floating around out there. She's done it in the past. She's able to regulate her body temperature in any climate due to her powers, which makes her nigh indestructible. She can adapt to extreme heat, extreme cold. I think the only thing she can't do is adapt to space because there's no atmosphere in space. But she's also able to control air pressure, which means she can crush literally anything by just increasing the air pressure around that thing. So, to put it bluntly, Storm is a god. She is a god, which, going back to her stats, it's a little reductive, where you can say her durability is 2. I assume that means her physical durability, where if you were like to hit her, like physically punch her, her durability will be a lot lower than someone else, let's say, like the Juggernaut or something, obviously. But her energy manipulation or her energy output, which is how I read that energy stat, is 5. Someone like, I think, Galactus or the Watcher or any cosmic being is past 7, I think. So if you range her power at 5 to be pretty high, I would say it's pretty low, considering all the abilities she's capable of doing. So the graph, the Marvel scale of powers always confounds me, especially when it comes to Storm and her just general crazy godlike abilities. You can see why I was nervous about doing this. Well, you can't because it's all ridiculous nonsense. But but I love Storm. I think she's an incredible character. I'll give you an example. I was walking through a certain big box retailer on a figure hunt. I do weird figure hunts when I'm out with my family, and I found there's a line of X-Men toys called X-Men 97 or something. Yeah, X-Men 97. And they're not reprints, but they're like reimagining old X-Men figures. It has really great packaging. The figures are awesome. They come with multiple hands or weapons or whatnot. And they had a Storm there, and I was like, I have to pick that up. This happened yesterday. I was like, I have to pick that up. I also picked up Bishop, I will be doing an episode on Bishop soon. But I picked up Storm and Bishop, and I was like, it inspired me, and I didn't even know it. I sat down today, and I was like, I have to record an episode about Storm because she's incredible. And damn it, if we don't have all the information, we're doing it live. Like I said, we're going ham because it's a crime that a website or a property like Super Black doesn't have Storm prominently featured. I did an article about that famous line she said in the first X-Men movie. Do you know what happens to a toad when it's struck by lightning? Same thing that happens to everyone else. Which is, from what I've read, it is one of the worst lines in movie history, people say. And I don't believe that, all right? I don't think it is a terrible line. As a matter of fact, I quite like the line. What? Because 1, it was said by Storm. And 2, what would you want her to say? How would you finish that line? What would you say to Toad before you struck him with lightning? Nothing? No, you have to say something quippy and quick. And I don't know about you, but I wouldn't come up with anything that interesting. But asking a toad, what would happen to him if he got struck by lightning is the same thing. Everything gets struck by lightning, same thing will happen. You die, dummy. He got struck by lightning and he got tossed out. And I think that scene is an iconic scene in comic book history because everyone remembers it and everyone's always talking about it. Regardless if it's in the negative, it's still there. I did read something that Josh Whedon wrote that line, which does sully it quite a bit. But I will give it to Halle Berry because she read it and she did the best she could. And, it's out there. So go check out that article on Super Black. I do write some alternate lines for it, but I don't remember what I said. But that's neither here nor there. So I did want to cover one funny thing that I read that you have to kind of frame in the realm of, hey, it's all, at the writer's behest. Whoever writes a certain character, has not carte blanche, but they do take liberties with their powers and kind of how things are manipulated, right? So I read that someone said that Thor versus Storm was an unfair matchup because Thor was not necessarily more powerful, but he had more control over things, whereas Storm was kind of a little more chaotic. I think that's how they read it. So in the mythos of X-Men, Storm is able to control the weather through some sort of psionic connection to, the weather and the climate and whatnot. Meaning, like, she can connect through her mind and kind of manipulate it that way, which is why she's called a mutant. But writers then wrote that she was the descendant of goddesses and priestesses and magical beings who were capable of controlling, the elements. So she has this sort of dual backstory where she's a mutant, but she's also like a magical person. The reason I bring up Thor is because they said, because Storm has a psionic connection to the weather, or some sort of mental or mutant connection to the climate, she is almost, she has like rules attached to her powers where she can't do anything to the weather without having it cause something else. She has a cause and effect thing. So if she wanted to cause a rainstorm somewhere, causing that rainstorm would remove moisture from another part of the world or some other town or whatever, somewhere close by. She would have to pull in moisture from the atmosphere to cause that rainstorm. Whereas Thor, being a fully magical being, could simply conjure up rain, or a thunderstorm above his head and not, it would be, disconnected from the elements, right? It's just a magical storm just appeared. Now, it will have a cause and effect, but it won't necessarily manipulate the weather in one specific place. It's like, well, there's one rainstorm happening in this place, it's going to have some sort of adverse effect to the weather. But Storm is beholden to those rules. That being said, she's also a descendant of a god, or goddesses and priestesses and stuff. So she has magical abilities, which kind of negates that whole theory. And that's why I said you had to walk into this sort of conversation with the understanding that it's all magical nonsense. I say that about everything. I love it. I love these story elements, and I love having these weird comic book debates about, who would win in a weather fight, Storm or Thor. Stan Lee, I think it was Stan Lee, who had there's a recording of him saying, "I never understand why people have these debates of who would win in a fight." He said, who would win? Whoever the writer wants to win. That's exactly right. Because Storm was always written as a mutant. But every piece of her history stitched together builds her into a character that is transcendent of what an X-Men would be. In the Jonathan Hickman run nowadays, she is one of the council members or regents of Krakoa? I can't remember the correct pronunciation of the planet. but she basically runs the mutant planet with, along with, like, I think it's Apocalypse, Charles Xavier, Magneto. All these Omega level mutants run the show, and Storm is one of, if not the most powerful on the panel, because she can manipulate the weather and kind of do all the things I said, air pressure manipulation, all that stuff, as long as there is an atmosphere around her. And if she is in a place, there's probably atmosphere around her, or else she wouldn't be able to survive. So you can see why, like, Storm's vast history and incredible amount of power has given me pause to talk about. I keep mentioning this, that it's been it's a huge thing, but it's a huge deal, man. I love freaking Storm. I was introduced to Storm in the X-Men cartoons. She was a prominent figure, and the central theme about this podcast is positive representation and kind of seeing yourself on screen or on the pages of a comic book, or whatever the case may be. And Storm was one of the first black superhero characters I saw on screen in the 90s, which is a long time for me to see that sort of representation. This, strong black woman who is dealing out crazy damage. There is a moment in, I think, the first episode of the X-Men where she's at the mall with her, Rogue, Gambit. They're all shopping or something, doing normal stuff. And the Sentinels come to abduct Jubilee, I think. And Storm does this move where she has her hands down and she lifts her hands slowly as this electricity runs up her body and removes her clothes and puts on her outfit. It was one of the coolest moments on TV that I've ever seen. I was like, oh my God, that lady's crazy. So she just turned her clothes from one thing to another with electricity and then proceeded to whoop everyone's tail. Now, be that as it may, as strong and powerful as Storm is, as intimidating as she is, which we'll get to in a little bit, they did saddle her with a strange weakness, which is emotions. Storm is, if Storm gets emotional, her powers go out of whack. Meaning, if she shows any sort of extreme emotion, and whether it be rage or sadness or whatnot, the weather will go bananas. Which is I don't know. If you think about it, which I won't get into too deep, but if you think about the fact that they saddled a woman with emotional problems tied to her power, I mean, it's a little weird, It's a little weird. We won't have that discussion, but you can have that discussion in the comments. Another one of her weaknesses is claustrophobia, which I thought was dope. Who doesn't hate being in incredibly tight spaces? The older I got, the more claustrophobic I did get. And I understood Storm more and more. Going back to that cartoon, there was a moment, I don't remember the episode or anything, but I vividly remember her being smothered by rocks and her kind of powers going all haywire, and then her passing out from being so afraid of being in a tight space and them having to rescue her. And I always thought that was a very visceral thing to show in a cartoon, especially if you're a person who doesn't like small spaces. To watch Storm kind of freak out and get depowered basically by just being surrounded was a strong was a strong weakness. That being said, how often is she going to be compressed? They had to find ways to put her in a box. Basically, they would just stuff her in a box somewhere, or put like some metal walls around her and close it around her to kind of subdue her powers. On the grand scheme of weaknesses, they're not the most, let's say, debilitating. I mean, if you stuff her in a box, obviously it's going to be freaky, but half the time she's flying, so it's kind of hard to contain Storm. To roll back just a little bit on the intimidation front, I've always had discussions with fellow nerds about who should play Storm, or better, who should have played Storm. People do not like the Halle Berry depiction of Storm. I'm fine with it. It could have been better, but everyone always says it was Angela Bassett. Angela Bassett should have played Storm in the X-Men movies, and I tend to agree. Why? For the same reason I've been talking about this entire podcast, Storm is intimidating. And I don't know about you, but Angela Bassett is intimidating as hell. Go watch, the second Black Panther movie, and watch that woman just absolutely work the screen with her full head of white hair, and tell me that's not an old Storm just running Wakanda. A little bit of trivia, Storm was Queen of Wakanda for quite a while. She was married to Black Panther. They ran Wakanda together. And as with all stories, it ended. So they got a divorce. But it's not irony. It's something. The fact that everyone wanted Angela Bassett to play Storm, and then she ends up playing Queen Ramonda of Wakanda. They gave her white hair, and they had her run the country in the second movie. Too many things lined up for that to happen, for us to not be like, that's what an old Storm would look like if her husband, the Black Panther, died and she had to run Wakanda. That's what Storm would look like. And it made me think back to the casting of Halle Berry and go, man, it would have been dope if Angela Bassett really did play Storm. She would have commanded the hell out of that. She would have been here's the thing. She would have been way too good for the first X-Men movie. The first X-Men movie is fantastic, guys. I love it. But having Angela Bassett there amongst all those other actors, just acting the absolute hell out of that movie. Are you telling me they wouldn't then just focus the entire thing on Angela Bassett? It would not have been the Wolverine show. He would have taken a hard back seat, and it would have been every subsequent X-Men movie would have just been Storm as the main character, because Angela Bassett would have killed it. Whereas, all right, now I'm coming around to what I said before. Halle Berry didn't do great. She didn't do an amazing job. She did a serviceable job, and I think she did a fantastic job in Days of Future Past, where she got to reprise her role and kind of be an older version, a more powerful version of Storm. And they kind of give her a weird not a weird send-off, but like maybe a fitting send-off. Like they do kill her off, but she dies in like protecting Xavier, whatever. She gets a send-off, right? And she gets to say goodbye to the character. And she did a good job in that movie, which also highlighted another relationship that they wrote Storm into in the comics, which was she was in love with Wolverine for a time, and kind of the Days of Future Past storyline and sort of other iterations where she had the Mohawk, and her and Wolverine were not a biker team, but they were, fairly close. Just thinking about what those X-Men movies would have been with Angela Bassett, let me know in the comments. Do you think in this mythical other alternate reality where Angela Bassett played Storm in the original X-Men movies, do you think she would have taken Wolverine's spot as the main character? I think so. I want to hear what you think. Let me know in the comments. We'll do a short bit of trivia, and then we're going to get you guys out of here in a tight 20-something minute episode. So one thing that I found out in my research for this episode, which I've done extensively over like however many years, is Storm was part of the Fantastic Four, which is an accolade that very few other superheroes can tout. I think the other ones are Spider-Man and Wolverine are the only other two official members of the Fantastic Four. The Fantastic Four's team that Storm was part of happened during the, I think it was the Civil War storyline, where Reed Richards and Sue Storm took a back seat, and they wanted to work on their marriage, and they didn't want to be a part of the Fantastic Four for a time. So they asked Storm and her then husband, T'Challa, Black Panther, to fill in for them. So they just added a different married couple to the Fantastic Four. So there are comics where the Fantastic Four are Storm, Black Panther, Johnny Storm, and Thing. I need to go read those comics because that sounds like a dope team. So think about that. Storm has been all over. I believe she was in X Factor at one point. She's just an incredible character. She's an amazing bit of representation for little black girls everywhere. I love the character. I think she gets quite a bit of shine. it's easy to say sometimes, this character doesn't get a lot of accolades or shine. Storm is one of the most popular characters, not just black characters, but just characters in comic books ever. Ever. And outside of, certain storylines here or there, she's always been just a beacon of grace and regality and just general, utter, destructive power, which is, an incredible feat for a black character in comics. Like I said at the start of this episode, there's no way to do Storm justice in a podcast, especially one by someone like me who, just hasn't read every Storm comic. But I do think it's important to highlight such an important character in comics and pop culture. And the more we big up these awesome black and brown superheroes, the better it'll be for kids. I want my daughter to look at Storm and say, oh, she's, a really cool character. She's not a huge superhero fan, but she does see it. I just want people to see it. And I hope this episode helps someone else recognize the awesomeness that is Ororo Munroe, aka Storm. This has been Super Black. Thank you so much for listening. If there's anything you'd like this podcast to talk about, please let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for the support. Again, tell a friend, tell two about this epic podcast. Make sure to head over to super.black for more. I appreciate you. Full stop.